How's everybody doing today? Fantastic. It's the last one of the day. It's kind of cool coming on after Wedge because we're also in Louisiana. We'll get to that in a second. But Wedge hosted a local GLC chapter pasture talk at his place, and so I went. And that's how I got introduced into GLC. So it works out that I'm coming on after Wedge. So like 4 or 5 years ago, yeah. So yeah, Wedge has forgotten more than I know, right, about cattle and stuff, right? So my name is Grant Estrade. Y'all may have listened to my wife Kate talk earlier about our direct-to-consumer retail business that we have. We're not really here to talk about that. We're here to talk about things like compost and soil and building up your organic matter on your farm. So this morning's talk, I want to say this. This morning's talk was pretty intense. Were y'all there for this morning's talk? I really enjoy talking about two things, right? Compost and things like goals and failure and things of that nature, right? We're going to talk a little bit about that. But this morning, I just want to let everybody know, whenever you're going after this kind of stuff and you're setting goals on your farm, and you want to achieve things, when you pick up like the stick of you wanting to achieve something, the other end of the stick is failure, right? And so we're all going to be exposed to failure throughout everything that we're trying on our farm, and that is part of the it's part of the deal, it's part of the learning process. Whenever we go after something that is going to be difficult, and farming is difficult, right? It is hard work. It's such hard work at night, you probably sleep like a baby. You wake up every 2 hours and cry. So we know that we're getting involved, right? We know that we're getting into these things. We know that we're going to fail. And part of that goal setting thing is, and we're going to talk about here's incrementalism, right? So if we're talking about pasture health, we're going to be doing it a little bit at a time, and that's what incrementalism is, right? And so there's an old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, and it is so true. It's very true. It's true in all of our goal setting, both our business goals, our personal goals, our pasture goals. So we're going to be doing a little bit at a time. And so one thing that I'm going to incorporate into the talk is that for us, we're rehabbing our pasture a little bit at a time with the tools that we happen to be using. So I just wanted to tie in what we heard this morning a little bit with what I'm going to be talking about. And so, we're all going to have rough days and difficult days whenever we go after these things. So keep your chin up and just remember to take it one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, one goal at a time. So I just wanted to kind of, say that this morning. I opened up a retail garden store going on 19 years ago. And speaking of failure, I was open for about 1.5 years, and then we got hit by Hurricane Katrina, right? And that led me into the composting and garden soil business, because what happened after Katrina? People were rebuilding, right? And so they were re-landscaping. And so it's an opportunity for me to get into something that I had always loved, even as a teenager. I grew up in Metairie, Louisiana, which is a suburb of New Orleans. Our farm is 60 miles north of New Orleans. My first exposure to agriculture was raising mice and rats to sell wholesale to the pet store where I worked. And so when you raise mice and rats, you have a lot of what? You have a lot of manure. So what do you do with the manure? You compost it, right? I mean, I grew up with little urban backyard compost piles at my dad's house, my parents' house where I lived, of course, and my grandparents' house. And so that's what I did. I piled it up and it got really hot. Like so hot, you can wrap your sandwich in foil and, heat it up in there, right? So after it cooked, what do? Well, you make a vegetable garden, right? And so I don't know how many, urban city 15-year-old dudes who are doing, growing vegetables out of the compost that they, from their rodents, right? And then you have to cook it. So I asked my grandma, how do you cook these, these greens? So I got to be part of the whole process. And the other thing, when I worked at the pet store, I was making $4.25 an hour. My dad was an accountant, so he taught me how to do basic books. When I averaged out what I was making at my own rodent business, I was making like $8 an hour raising rodents. So that's kind of a cool thing. So anyway, so that's how we got exposed to agriculture, and that's how I got exposed to composting. And as we all experience in life, we get exposed to things where we go, man, this is like really cool. I really like this, right? And that's how we got into this part of the business. So fast forward, we now have a successful composting business, got a lot of experience with that, and then we start up the farm. We started with 16 acres. The fields were extremely poor, and so I'm a compost guy, right? That's what I got exposed to in business. We got into the farm because I had started a large-scale composting facility with a group of folks, and we had 10 acres of windrow compost piles, right? Large-scale facility. And so I understood the logistics and the handling and all that kind of stuff of compost. And so whereas grazers, people, they want to graze, they want to do rotational grazing to grow soil, I was asking myself, how can we speed up, the process to do that? And so the marriage that I like to see with ag and with farms is that a farm can serve as a recycling facility to an otherwise waste problem, right? And so we're talking about getting organic matter through cover crops, and we're talking about getting organic matter through the manure in cattle, right? But what about bringing waste residual products onto the farm? This group is great. There's also a big national composting group. This is the U.S. Composting Council. They're just as active as this organization. And wouldn't that be cool if both the organizations got together? Because what do they try to do? They want to reroute organic matter away from landfill, and they want to get it to other places. We talk about we want to absorb and minimize carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Do you know what gas that they talk about? Methane. What happens when organic matter goes to landfill? Methane, because it goes anaerobic, right? Awesome. Yeah, so anaerobic decomposition creates methane, right? And so that's actually, I've heard an argument, if you have a low-lying field, there's actually an argument to go ahead and put in a swale or something into a field, because a low field that's wet all the time is kind of like generating methane, right? So that's an argument for maybe restoring a low land into pasture, because then you're going from a methane producing field to a carbon sequestering field, right? And so that's just a real cool merger. So that's how I kind of think, one person's problem is another person's solution. And who here has too much organic matter on their farm? Right. So this is the incrementalism. We want to make these changes over a long period of time, and we want to do it nice and slow, and we want to do it steady. So, was there more people in the ballroom this morning, or was there more people in the ballroom at lunch? Do y'all remember? Lunch, okay. Who ate breakfast this morning? Right? Did you see the bar, the hotel bar? How many people were sitting at the hotel bar this morning? I didn't see anybody sitting at the hotel bar, right? How many people do you think are going to be sitting over there at 5 o'clock? Right? What's the connection, right? Well, you've got booze at the bar at 5 o'clock, and you got food in the ballroom at 12 o'clock, right? The people went to where the food was, right? Or in the bar, they went there for the drink, right? You're giving them something, and that attracted them. And so it's the same thing with the organisms in in the soil, right? The small herd. I love that, the small herd, right? If you add up the weight of the worms and the nematodes and the fungi on a per acre basis in your soil, it's a substantial amount of physical weight. It really is. And they metabolize a huge amount of material. So it is, in fact, a small herd underground. I love that. And so if anybody has read any Aldo Leopold stuff, he wrote about trophic cascade. Has anybody seen, it's that Yellowstone video, if you Google like wolves changed pattern of river? Has anybody ever seen that? Well, when the wolves started coming around, they started chasing the ruminants away from the river system where they were doing a lot of heavy grazing, and that was causing the banks of the river to actually be able to regrow grass. And through that process, it actually made the river a little bit healthier, and it started changing the course of some of the river. So that the trophic cascade was an example of predator species influencing the prey, and that influenced the ecosystem, right? So that was kind of a top-down, approach. Now, what we're trying to do is that we're trying to go from bottom up, right? We want to feed the fungi and the bacteria in the soil, and that's going to grow more grass, and then we're going to be able to put, more ruminants or whatever we're doing on top of the grass. And so there's really not a great term for that, so I kind of made that up 3 years ago when we were here talking about this at GLCI, was trophic escalation. You're basically feeding the microbes in the soil with organic matter that you're bringing in, and then you're going to be able to feed another species as a result. Oh, I did forget something. The part of the talk was like trophic cascade 3 years later. And so I talked about this 3 years ago. And so has it worked for us? It works. Like our pastures and the places where we've been doing this, been completely different than 3 years ago. So we have done no, analysis, no scientific study on it, but the proof is in the pudding, right? We're growing grass, right? And we're grazing it, as opposed to having, one bunch grass and dirt and bunch grass and dirt and bunch grass. And so it definitely does work. And so we're going to have to bring organic matter in. In this case, I have agricultural waste residuals to bring that stuff in. And you may not be in an area where you can get your hands on this stuff in the context. You may not be able to get it depending on your area, but a lot of us do live and have farms near metropolitan areas. And a couple hours away, you can still maybe find these materials to bring in. The first talk, I forgot her name, the opening keynote talk, Meredith. Yeah, I don't know if you caught this. She described her land as her own barrier reef. Did y'all hear that? Has anybody been scuba diving before? Been scuba diving before, right? It's awesome. Well, I started laughing when I heard that because, this is a terrestrial concept that I'm talking about, right? We're doing it on land versus doing it in an aquatic system. When you inject a huge amount of organic matter in the bottom of the ocean, it completely creates its own ecosystem. So if you Google whale fall, that's when a whale dies and it goes to the ocean floor, and there's so much organic matter on a whale, like a big whale, like the size of a school bus or whatever, right? When that thing drops down to the bottom of the ocean where there's not a lot of nutrients, it has like 5 to 8 year residual on the life down there. It actually creates almost an ecosystem on the carcass of the whale. And so when you're dealing with a terrestrial environment like what we have at the land that we bought, it was prior, row crops for who knows how many years. It was just not healthy soil whatsoever. So it was fairly desolate of nutrients. And so in order for us to speed up, we had to do a terrestrial whale fall. We had to bring in just a lot of organic matter, to speed it up. I'm 42, and so I kind of feel like, I want to speed things up as fast as possible, with doing this. And we can bring in organic matter through cover crops and do all those things, like I said, but bringing in organic matter to our farm speeds it up quite a bit, right? Who cuts hay here? Does anybody, like, what's like a weight of hay that you produce like per acre?
Depending on how much you graze, a couple tons.
Couple tons, right? And so we just got hit by Hurricane Ida, and we got minimum damage. Thank goodness. Most of the damage was east of us. But being in the composting business, I kind of know the deal. Federal contractors come in and they do what? They clean up all the tree debris. That truck brought us 5,600 cubic yards of mulch. The weight of that would be 5,600 times 5,600. It's basically like 2,000 tons of material that got brought to us. And the deal that I made with the company was, I won't charge you a tippage fee, which is what the fee that a landfill would charge, but you have to deliver it and you have to put it in windrows for me. A windrow, as you know, is an elongated pile, same as hay, same in composting. It keeps the piles not too big because they can spontaneously combust and catch on fire because compost piles get really hot. So, you know, I got pretty excited about the mulch being delivered to our place, right? Because it's 5,600 cubic yards of material that I can spread out on our farm in strategic areas that's going to bring in organic matter. And so how long would that take me to do, you know, with a cover crop or something else? Another product that we've been taking in for years, is coffee grounds. And again, this is context. And so if you like what I'm saying here and you're like, oh, that's pretty cool, I'm going to think about doing this, you can go out and you can source waste streams that are available to you. We get coffee grounds by the ton in super sack totes. You know those big super sack totes that feed comes in? There's a company in New Orleans where they do cold brew, meaning they have these big stainless steel tanks, they put coffee grounds in it, they steep it in cold water, they package up in coffee concentrate, right? And so they get their coffee grounds in super sack totes, and they auger out the wet coffee grounds back into the same super sack totes, and then we pick them up. And so funny story about social media, they started producing more and more coffee grounds, and we were paying for the haul. So I was paying a hauler to go pick them up because I got tired of doing the hauling myself. Well, they're like producing like more than they've ever produced. And so it was costing me money, you know, because I was paying for the hauls. And so I liked the coffee grounds, but you know, I was looking at what we were paying every month, and I was like, man, we're paying a lot of money on this haul. So I call them up and I said, man, what's going on? They're like, this influencer person on TikTok made a video making like a milkshake or something with our coffee product, and it got 4 million views. And then she did a second video and she got another like 3 or 4 million views. We can't handle the orders that we're getting, national orders. Anyway, so their coffee production came up, and I said, guys, look, I love y'all. I'm committed to pick up the coffee grounds, but y'all need to start paying for some of the hauling. And so they're paying. So now we send them an invoice once a week as part of, you know, the haul of the cost of bringing it in. But folks, we get about 12 tons of coffee grounds a week. So yeah, you know, composting is expensive. And so right now we're doing land field application strategically. And so we do compost it because we're in a composting garden soil business. So I sell compost by the cubic yard. We'll bag it up. You know, I'm in that business, and we do use the coffee grounds as a key ingredient, and we do compost that. But every time you handle organic material, on average, it costs you about $1 to $1, anywhere from $1 to $2 per cubic yard every time you touch it, right? And so, you know, that I got to offload it off the trailer, you know, that's $2. I got to bring it another place on the farm, that's another $2. So what we're doing to save money is that we're doing strategic field application to it.
Just straight on the field?
Straight on the field. And
chickens in it?
yeah, so So part of what we're doing is that we have layers. Right now we'll have 3 flocks of about 400, so we've got 1,200 layers. The cool thing about the coffee grounds is that soldier fly love laying their eggs in coffee grounds. Soldier fly is a type of fly. It doesn't have any working mouth parts to it, so it's not a pest fly. You know, it won't land on your mashed potatoes, you know, at your picnic kind of a thing. But they lay eggs in the coffee grounds and then they hatch out. Soldier fly is actually one of the main human insect foods that's being studied internationally because it's 19% protein, and then we can eat it. They don't carry any disease or whatever. So typically in the coffee grounds, there are soldier fly larvae throughout the coffee grounds, and then so the chickens are actually scratching the coffee grounds to go after the maggots. And so, yeah.
How does the soldier fly exist, and do they absorb all the nutrients they need for their life cycle when they're in the larvae?
Yeah, so after, great question. So they're larval stage, they metamorphosize, they turn into adults, and then they're going to be alive as long as they can run until they run out of juice. And so, yeah, it's a very quick life cycle. So their mission is just to breed, and that's it. Yeah, and so they look like a little black wasp. They're cool. Don't get me started talking about soldier fly.
Rugweeds and all the like chicken treats that are not mealworms are soldier fly.
Yeah. So what I do when I go out in the field, and again, you know, these conferences are so cool because, you know, I might be talking to a guy from Texas who's got 30,000 acres, right? Well, you know, this may not be applicable to what he's doing, right? For us, we've got 60 acres, and that's it. So, you know, the whole thing, like if I do rotational grazing, is equivalent to me buying like 3 more farms. You know how people do that math, right? Well, it's the same thing. You know, by me going out and putting the organic matter down, we're buying more. It's like us buying more real estate. It's equivalent. And what we're doing with this amount of organic matter, it is a lot of organic matter, right? We're not spreading it with a manure spreader. I'm not putting a 1/4 inch across an acre. I'm finding the worst spots on our property and we're putting it like really thick. That area is healed for like 10 years. As far as I'm concerned, it's healed because what's going to happen, as soon as those areas start to regrow, then we're going to have grass there, then we're going to graze it, and then it's going to get refertilized, and so it's done. So the residual is very long term, and then we didn't have any cost in it. My job is to pick the areas where we need to apply the compost in large amounts. Or in this case, it's not compost, it's just straight coffee grounds. And so if you're getting any kind of waste product, depending on how volatile it is, you know, you might get like food waste. God, that stuff is gross, man. It's like putrid, you know, disgusting, you know, stuff. You need to compost that, right? Otherwise, it's just going to be a mess on your property. The coffee ground is very stable, right? Hay has a CN ratio. CN ratio is carbon-nitrogen ratio. Hay is like, you know, like 70-1, something like that, right? The more carbon that's in it, the less volatile it's going to be, the less it's going to smell. You know, coffee grounds are like 40-1, so still a lot of carbon in it, so it's still fairly stable. If we were getting like fish waste in, like fish heads and guts and something like that, you know, it's going to be like, I don't know, like 10-1 or something. It's extremely volatile. It's going to smell bad. It can go anaerobic very quick, and it's just going to be kind of like a total mess.
Grant, are there any concerns about like either soil acidity or, you know, just when you're putting that much of one thing, you know, on land that has been its own thing for a while?
Yeah.
Any kind of negative?
Great question. No, so we haven't. Our soil is slightly acidic. Wedge is probably pretty similar to your pH. He's not very, you know, Wedge isn't very far from us. Coffee grounds actually have a neutral pH. Coffee is acidic. The coffee grounds tend to be pretty neutral. Now, let's just say I had a product where the pH was a concern. If I compost it, the composting process typically is going to balance out, you know, the pH. Yeah, so I'm not too overly concerned about that. But again, I'm not we're not repeatedly dumping on the same spot, over and over again. And so, and you know how hard soil pH is to change. I mean, people spend a lot of money to try to change their pH, and they don't have any success with it. So no, we haven't really had any issues with that at all. I took this picture because it's surrounded by young goldenrod, and that patch was where we had spread some coffee out. And then what we're seeing is that this is the same thing that you see whenever you do bale grazing or wherever you put out hay. There's that green circle in your field. That's the same thing that we're getting, of course, when we're spreading out the compost. I mean, if I spread it out in a shape of a trapezoid, I'm going to have green in a trapezoid pattern, right? And so that's why we're strategically, placing it, wherever we're putting it. So there's a whole bunch of people out there that you can look at and follow. Of course, Dr. Allen, right, was speaking about a lot of this. He was speaking about your small herd, the fungi, the protozoa, the bacteria. One thing that he said today in the first session, if you were there, was that typically our soils are bacteria dominated, and we're trying to increase the fungi in the soil. A good way to increase the fungi in the soil is to add carbon, right? Most of the things that you get your hands on in the composting world are going to be high, carbon. And so if you throw the truck driver $20 who's on the crew, who's clearing the power lines, by your place, if they're chipping it, they got to dump it someplace, right? And so that's all going to be carbon. And when you put that stuff out in your field, you're going to be creating areas where you're going to start having fungus growing. So the other thing besides the green up is going to be the biodiversity, right? Again, we go back to the whale fall example. So whenever we put out the compost in that area, once it recovers, the biodiversity increases, right? So if I dig in there, we're talking worms, we're talking beetles, right? And we're talking grasshoppers. We're talking about like the whole food chain increases in that little area. And since we've been doing this, just like Sarah talked about observations, right? Frogs in our place have increased. Because I'm like, I love looking at that stuff, right? So frogs have increased, praying mantises have increased, right? Because we're creating a more of a food chain, but we're starting with the fungi, the protozoa, and the bacteria. And those are just some mushrooms that are popping out in a spot exactly where we dumped the coffee grounds. He also mentioned Elaine Ingham, which I highly recommend that you look up her work, because she's one of the experts internationally who are investigating the relationships of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, with plant growth and how they help communicate and transfer nutrients in your soil. But they're not going to exist until you get the organic matter into the soil, right? And so it's like anything else in life. If you want heat out of a wood-burning stove, you have to put in wood first, right? If you're using an old hand pump, a shallow well hand pump, you have to put water in it first and then pump it to get the siphon going. And so at some point, our context is that we're starting with really poor soil. So in order to get the nutrient cycling going, we have to put the fuel in to do that. A lot of people may use, fertilizer to do it, but it's expensive. You have to spread it. If you spread it, the fertilizer, and if it doesn't rain within a couple of days, it may oxidize and you may lose it, depending on what kind of fertilizer you have. And so it's really important, I think, to use organic matter as your fertilizer instead of a bag fertilizer, even if it is organic or synthetic or whatever it is. The compost teas, we one of the types of composting that we do is vermicomposting. So we raise red wigglers, and so we actually get the coffee grounds, we compost it. We have these worm beds specifically for the red wigglers. We feed them, and then we screen out all the fines. That's all their manure, right? And then so that stuff is really rich in biology. We could make a tea out of that, but we don't. We have not used it yet. And so we're actually sending a worm casting sample off to one of Elaine Ingham's people to get a bacteria, fungal, and nematode count from them as part of what we're looking at. You know, when you talk to people about biological soil tests, it's pretty interesting because they will give you an idea of like percentage of bacteria, percentage of fungi, percentage of nematodes, but they're not going to give you like the species because they haven't identified enough species to be able to tell you what they are, right? It's the fat lipid test. What they're doing is that they're basically counting the lipids in it, and they can figure out, was that from a fungus or was that from a nematode or protozoa? However they do that, I'm not a lab guy, but they don't even know. So they can't tell you what's in it. They can kind of give you an idea, right? So, you know, we're you know, we know enough to know that we don't know a lot about soil biology at this point. But we do know that it starts with organic matter, and that is the key because not only does it feed them, but it keeps the moisture in the soil, it keeps the temperature stable, it gives them a house to live in, right? And so what we're doing, this is a field that, one of the last fields that we're fixing, we just purchased the acres next to us that we were leasing, and so this field was wet, and so I don't want to spread compost on the whole field because I don't have a manure spreader. It's not that I don't want to buy a manure spreader, right? I really want to buy a manure spreader, but it's just another piece of, you know, as they say, steel on your farm that you're only going to be using every now and then. I did get a small tractor. It was the first tractor I've ever had. I'm more of a bobcat, like skid steer guy. And so we sold the little tractor. I bought another tractor, a bigger tractor, had a loader on and all that kind of stuff. And then a friend of mine had a friend who was selling the same exact tractor. It was like an 80s Yanmar diesel for like super cheap. And so I told Kate, I was like, let me buy the second tractor because I can probably flip it and I'll get all that money and put it towards this other tractor I just bought. And then I told her, Kate, I'm keeping both tractors. And she says, surely you can't be serious. And I say, I am serious, don't call me Shirley. So one tractor is named Shirley and one tractor is named Sirius.
Sounds like you got a market to get the manure spreader.
Yes. So, yeah. So this field, what I did, I went out when it was raining in this field because I wanted to see where the water was puddling, right? And so I stuck the PVC posts wherever the puddles, wherever I had accumulation, and that's where I was spreading the compost. So that was my guide. So for me, my guide for spreading the compost strategically is going to give me two things. If it's exposed soil, definitely to put compost there. And if it's an area of low water percolation, I put the compost there, right? And from what I've seen so far is that once I've put on the compost in a thick way, we're talking about this is going to end up being a couple of inches of compost in that area. When I go back in that area after a heavy rain, there's no puddle there anymore, right? The organic matter has compressed. A lot of it has been oxidized, right? It's gone off in the carbon dioxide and other gases. A lot of it has been brought down into the soil, but it literally created a couple of inches of topsoil like right there, and so it solved the water perk problem in that area, right? And that's why I wanted to bring up the incrementalism in this because we're literally doing it one small area at a time, but if we're doing it for years, before we know it, you know, the whole farm is going to be taken care of. And so you can bring in off-farm material, which is what I'm recommending because depending on your state and depending on your scenario, you could get permitted to take an organic material, and the company who's bringing it to you may not only bring it to you, but they may pay you to take it, known as a tippage fee, right? But in order for you to receive payment for it, you really, it's like anything else, once you go into commodity, or once you go into commerce, then like permits start, everybody wants to be permitted for everything. Then you may have to get properly permitted, and it's a state-to-state thing. So this could be a money saving, a money generating thing for a farm. You may end up getting into the composting business. I tell farmers that, like, look, do you have a tractor? And they go, yeah. Does it have a loader on it? I go, yeah. Why don't you start up a little composting business? You make a bunch of compost, and if you don't sell it, then you can use it on your own pasture. So it's kind of like a win-win. Yeah.
What do you think of horse manure?
Horse manure is great. It's high in carbon, because most horse manure is from horse stables, right? And so it's going to be some sort of wooden shaving. It's going to be the residual hay from feeding. And their manure, for the most part, is pretty high carbon. The most volatile thing in horse stable sweepings is the manure, is the urine, right? And that is typically fleeting, right? So whenever it's handled, a lot of that urine, because it's ammonia at that point, or it's nitrogen, it's going to be oxidized very quickly into ammonia. Typically, you lose a lot of the nutrient value in it. So if you're looking at horse stable sweepings as a fertilizer, it's a very, very, very low nutrient, but it's super high in carbon, which fungus likes, which then brings in the carbon. So it's great as a carbon material. So a lot of people will say, I got horse stable sweepings, I'm really excited, I'm going to use it in my vegetable garden. It's like, well, yeah, at that point, it's kind of like a mulch. It's not like a fertilizer. Chicken litter is very high in nutrient, right? It's got a very low CN ratio, and it is very nutrient dense, and that would be considered more of a fertilizer, right? And in our area, there's a lot of chicken houses. And so a lot of guys, they hire a company, they clean out the stalls, the composting shed from the chicken houses, and they spread their chicken litter out on the fields. And then as we get more and more into people living around farms, then they get mad at the neighbors because it smells up the area for a couple of days. So you can bring all that. You can bring on off-farm, residuals from other operations, or you can have your on-farm generated, compost or material. In this case, this is just an example. Just like Wedge says, we buy hay. In our area, guys will deliver hay. Not really the best quality in the world, but we have a low-quality hay anyway. $35 a round bale delivered, to our farm. It's pretty close to their production costs at that point to make the hay. So, and then my favorite hay to buy is the hay that got wet, because they'll deliver it for $20, $25 a round bale. And so that's what we'll use, with the hogs. That hoop barn, once the hogs are out there, we'll go in with our Bobcat and we'll muck it out, and then we'll let it sit and age, and then we'll strategically put it in the field. And then with the chickens, we do get day-old chicks in, and then we'll be in that hoop house for 5 months. Now, the interesting thing I want to say about the chicken litter is that I'm in the soil business. So we have a rule in the chicken hoop house, no hay, because I don't want any weed seeds in the bedding. Because what we're going to do is that we're going to compost that chicken litter. I'm going to put it through a 1/4-inch screen. I'm going to bag it in a 35-pound bag, and I'm going to sell it for $12, right? $15, sorry. So the group of chicks in there was about $1,200, and odds are, once all that bedding is said and done, packaged, labeled, sold, it'll probably be about $1,500 worth of chicken litter that we're selling to gardeners. These are folks buying a bag or two, right? And so, this is coming in and it's going out to the field. This is coming in and it's going out to our customer base, and then we're bringing cash back into the operation, if that makes sense. So we're looking at it from both ways. We're bringing organic matter in for our pasture, and we are cash flowing a little bit of it as well.
Do you sell eggs or chicken?
We sell eggs. Yeah, we're into the layers right now. But if you talk to me, in a couple of months, we may be doing broilers. But that's a whole nother story. Surely, seriously. Who didn't get that? I mean, who hasn't seen an airplane? I tested 2 jokes out on y'all that I've never done in front of a group before, so thank you for that. That was one of them. The other thing that we'll do with the coffee grounds is that we'll put it down first. So I'll put it like 12 inches down, a foot of coffee grounds. And then this is what we did on this. We're not really doing this all that much anymore. And then we put a whole bunch of hay down. It was super thick. And then we put the pigs in there. And then after the pigs did what we were going to do with them in that area, then we just picked up that hog fencing and we just left everything in place at that point. And so we put everything in, we let the pigs root it around, and then we just left it. And then we seeded it or did whatever we were going to do with it. But that's another thing you can do. And that would be something you can do in a sacrifice area, right? So if it's the wet time of the year, or whatever, and you have access to a lot of material, and then you're going to put your animals, whatever they may be, in a segregated spot, you might as well just put something like super thick with carbon, because they're going to urinate in it. It's going to actually capture the urine. It's going to capture all that manure is going to get mixed up in it. And then you can even leave it in place when it's done, and you can rotate your sacrifice areas at different points in the year, because remember, material handling is very expensive when it comes to this. So every time you move something, it's costing you a couple bucks per ton or per cubic yard, or whatever you're dealing with. So if you can strategically put it in one area and then move on, you move it on, you put a cover crop on it, you throw some seed down, and then you're kind of off to the races a little bit. I think that's the last slide. So the point, I'll get to you in a second. So the point I want to emphasize is this. There are tons and tons of organic matter that are being thrown away every day. Depending on where you're located, because this is a logistic material handling issue, odds are there might be some material that you can access for free, for cheap, right? Or you might be able to get paid to take it. It depends on what's happening in your area, right? Area that have ice storms, the same companies that come in and clean up in the Gulf Coast or the East Coast when there's hurricanes, those guys work ice storms too, and they pick up tree debris after ice storms in different areas. And so this is all over the place. So I recommend that you become creative on trying to source the organic matter near you, because it fits into the regenerative scheme, right? Because like I said, we want to sequester carbon, and rerouting the organic matter away from landfill is going to minimize your methane off-gassing that you'd find at landfill, right? If you look up the EPA stats, the majority of things that are put into a landfill are organic matter, right? And then to go back to, the pigs. Let's see, where's that slide? I can't find it. I'm lost, totally lost. I struggle. All right. All right, so the picture on the right here, do y'all see the cardboard boxes in there? Cardboard boxes they're carbon. They're and so the pigs, I don't know if you've ever seen a pig grab like hay and they shake it like a dog. They love cardboard boxes, right? And so all of our cardboard, we don't put it like in a recycling pile. We just bring it in for the pigs. And we'll actually throw in the boxes in the field where they are, because they rip it up so much in such a short period of time, it just gets worked into the dirt.
You know why the mushroom is so popular?
Why the mushroom is so popular?
He's a fun guy.
Oh, he's a fun guy.
But I'm fun.
We source several thousand tons a year of damaged grain. I should say several thousand, about 2,000 tons a year of damaged grain.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it is good, and some of it is worth the
Yeah.
And some of it we separate out the dirt, some of it we, you know, a lot of times it's cleanings, because they bunker store millions upon millions, there's 25 to 30 million bushel of corn stored on the ground in the wintertime within 35 miles of my feedlot. Well, they end up with the bottom 2 inches. It's not rotten, but it's dirty. Because they pick up clay and they gotta scrape that off of there so it doesn't make a rot layer the next time. And so they scrape that up into piles, and then we come in with our trucks. We source it, we go back and what's clean enough, we use.
Right.
Incorporate into our grow rations, and what is too dirty goes straight out and gets dumped in the pastures.
Yeah, exactly right. Yep. Yeah. And
I mean, and it's amazing how much time the deer and the turkeys will come in and scatter those piles, and they'll work. I mean, a doe will sit there all morning long, picking one grain at a time out of the pile.
yeah.
But I mean, and that's, so if you're within 20, 30 miles of a grain elevator, go talk to them, see what they do with that.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing what's out there. Stuff that you never even think of.
We were doing spent brewery grain for a while from brewery. It's really wet, really heavy, but some people, you know, have success with it. We also get beans from the bean plant that wasn't a seed.
Yeah. So we have a bean facility that gets super sacks of like lentils and garbanzos and limas in, and they repackage it for our region. And we get in, I don't know, we're getting like 8 tons, like 16 tons a month. And it's I have to pick it up. That's the deal, you know. And a lot of times I sell it, and I make pretty.
Why would you? Because a cowman can give $200 a ton for that.
Yeah, I know, because that's what I sell off 3/4 of the load, and then I keep, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious, in my part of Minnesota, like leaves, everyone like in the country is driving around and they just throw the bags of leaves in the ditch, you know? And I'm just wondering about that, put like some hay bales, like a little area and a sign alongside the road and just let people bring stuff. Or what are your thoughts about people bringing your stuff?
We didn't put the slide in, but you know, pumpkins are really cool from pumpkin patches and Halloween. It's like, you know, Halloween pumpkins are like an example of why Americans are just have like complete disconnect, you know, because they're putting food out as decoration and they throw it away. I know there's jack-o'-lantern pumpkins and then eating pumpkins. I get it, right? Yeah. So we put out, for the first time on social media, we put out, hey, if you have pumpkins, you know, try. And then keep in mind, our store is 8 miles from downtown New Orleans. So our store is in the metro area. The farm is 60 miles north of New Orleans. But I think so far, we've had people bring in, by weight, just eyeballing it, probably about 5 tons of pumpkins that they brought to the store. And then you can compost it, but that has a feed quality. So we're feeding that to the livestock, right? So instead of composting it, we're going to feed it to the animals first and then. So we're going to get that use out of it, you know, the first time around, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
Essentially, like, people love to give you their trash if it's of value. So I think that.
So, and it's a great, I told Kate, and I was like, so many people brought pumpkins. Next year, we need to like start advertising it. We need to give them a coupon or something. Like, bring the pumpkin and we're going to give you a coupon for 10% off of our farm products. You know, because these are people who care. I mean, they're getting in their car and they're driving to drop us off a pumpkin, right? And
a lot of them are our customers.
yeah.
Just kind of viral.
Wait, let's see. Okay, wait. Let me work this. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right, Ted.
Well, I was just gonna say, when you were just talking about, you know, moving those pumpkins through the animals as a feed source, then a carbon source, you know, then a fertilizer source. What you're talking about here and what we're doing, especially when it's working with ruminants for protein production, we really need to think in terms of, we are first and foremost in the nutrient handling business, first and foremost. 10% of what a cow eats, she retains, nutrition-wise, everything else out the back. What you're doing with waste of grain. This is all a big nutrient handling game that we're doing. And we need to sales of that is the byproduct. Now it's our cash generator primarily, but we bring in, the grain that we bring into our grazing cattle that we supplement with is largely valued from a soil nutrient standpoint, so much more even than the cattle feed. So when you look at that, the feed aspect of that, it really cheapens that as an energy creation system for cattle. But primarily, we want that to end up out in the pasture, just like your coffee grounds or your compost.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's kind of a paradigm shift thinking, and you're really onto that with that. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, if only the ruminants would eat the coffee grounds, that'd be pretty sweet, right? Because that would be like, is it a grain or is it? I don't know. Yeah, it's a fruit, like a fruit fed. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Have you tried to compost any of those like bioplastics or like the sugarcane plates?
They're awful. Yeah, they're just awful. We were part of a couple of events to where we agreed to take in the compostables from like an event, and they were doing the forks and the bowls and all that kind of stuff. Theoretically, they're compostable, but plastic bottles are also theoretically compostable. And that stuff is just awful to break down, even in a hot windrow pile. It's better than plastic. But yeah, that's my. They're.
So theoretically, could it break down in landfill
Yeah, that it's long.
So it's like maybe that's what.
It's like more of a biodegradable. Versus a. Yeah.
A bread sack won't break down in 27 years underneath the foot of counter. We were cleaning some old pens that we used to feed get bread by the
Yeah.
straight truckload.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Well, when you've got a straight truckload of bread and 70 sows, you're not opening and dumping every pound.
Yeah.
So you're pitching with a cob fork. Consequently, you end up with a lot of bread
Oh.
wrap.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, my dad's been dead 11 years. He didn't have to deal with any of them bread wrappers. It worked perfect for him.
Yeah.
We know when we're about to get a pen clean because we get down to the bread wrap. We're cleaning.
Yeah.
pens in the feed
It's
lot.
an archaeological excavation. Yeah.
We also, my son has a hay enterprise. Does a lot of little square baling, and he has one crop farmer that he puts up little square bales of straw for. They take 20 acres, little square bale. They go in and sell that straw just as high for decorative straw.
That's right.
They bring 100 bales at a time into his wife's garage, and she sells from 2 to 10 bales in town of straw for people wanting fall decorations. Some of them will keep them till Christmas. Nobody has figured out that in their little garden shed they could keep that straw till the next year.
Yeah. So when you.
So there will be Facebook post after Facebook post right after Christmas. Somebody come get my straw.
Yeah. So we need to tell them is, look, we're going to sell you the straw. We'll take it back if you bring pumpkins with it.
Yeah. But it is hilarious. I asked Jake, I said, what? He said, well, he said, Jason's worried because Kelly has sold all of his bedding for calf and heifers. Said he doesn't know, he's probably gonna go and buy some brown bales of straw from us to replace all of it.
Yeah, he just has to drive through the neighborhood.
Bring you pumpkins and they can sell the same bale next year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wedge.
A coupon, give them 4 eggs, then you get an egg custom.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, a bunch of them do. A bunch of the new ones do just become customers. Water on inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess another one to add is I do a Christmas tree recycling program for people who bring Christmas trees.
Yeah.
to my place.
Yeah.
And I've gone through about 600 or 800 Christmas trees that people bring to my place. And the best for me has been Lowe's. And that's been surprising. When we talk about distance, and some of them from the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, they call me and they drive an hour to bring me a flatbed of Christmas trees, and I just push them in a pile with the goats. I actually put snow over them so that they kind of keep it longer, and then let the goats eat on. But then I'm wondering, I've been burning them. I'm thinking now after listening to this, like if I spread them out and maybe had someone like chip them or something, because those the trunks and stuff stay for a while. I don't know your thoughts on that. And then overall wood chip.
If you could chip them, Home Depot now rents chippers out.
I
On the,
don't want to feed them though. I guess I was wondering if I could just drive.
You have a
rotary, like a
you have-
rotary, like a bobcat or something.
You have a
Well, the tub, yeah, I mean, Christmas trees are only like a 3-4 inch caliper, and that big chipper, like that chipper with that thing that's about that big, that'll eat up those Christmas trees like that. The tub grinder is just an expensive piece to bring in for that.
And then I guess your overall thought on wood chips, I know you're talking about a lot, like some tips to get it, because I've been waiting 12 years and I finally found the right tree, and I want them to keep coming. They're dumping them like great. And I don't know, like you said, packs of beer, $20. Like I don't want them to leave. I don't know how to keep them coming.
Yeah, do whatever.
And I see their pile, I'm like, yes.
Yeah. A 6-pack, whatever you need to do.
I don't leave it out there. I just any tips to, because it's hard to find wood chips, or at least I've had such a hard
Oh, yeah.
time. Other people are like, yeah, like that picture of this. I'm like, gosh, that'd be amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, do whatever you need to do to keep it coming. Yeah. And, some people, whoever you're working with this organic matter, they have to be able to work with you. One reason why we're not picking up the spent brewery grain, because when we first started up the farm, I had sold my shares in the soil business. I was kind of like, I didn't have a job, for a little while. So I had a lot of time. And so I was picking up the spent grain, but as our business started to develop, it was like, now I'm like, I got to go pick it up. And it became like this like part-time job, and they weren't doing me any favors. They weren't giving me their schedule. They weren't, it was like whenever I showed up, I was like part of the labor force to help load it. And so I just begged out of it. And I said, hey guys, look, like I'm giving you 3 months notice, find another farmer. And they found like somebody else in about a week, and that's fine, And so the payoff, even in the feed value, the spent grain wasn't worth the logistics and my time and everything else to go after. Oh, it's very, yeah. But we need to go. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So if anybody wants to talk compost later, just let me know.